A definition that really draws me for trauma is that trauma is the alarm that never stops ringing.
We all had the trauma of leaving home, our mama.
Yeah.
We had any defense if we left home.
Our origin story originates in trauma, right? We come screeching through the birth canal. It's not a calm moment. Yeah, from the very beginning. No, I think it far less matters, and I think that's my point, as to how we categorize or quantify or label the kinds of trauma. What I refer to as a PTSD superhighway. No control of this vehicle that you are supposed to be in charge of, right? Because you are already to the other far extreme of, fight or freeze or, that response, without having that genuine ability to step away from yourself and let that emotion have some space.
Well, that you just listened to, that who was Cristina Pearse. It's Cristina with an A on the end, and Pearse spelled like, I guess, hearse, Pearse, some kind of Irish version of it, Cristina Pearse. And Cristina, I am so happy to welcome you to Diacardia.
Thank you, Dan. It's wonderful to be here.
That's so great. I say welcome you to Diacardia, and I hear in my own head, it's a thing, a podcast, and it's a thing, a way of being, of listening through the heart, not just the head, and speaking from the heart and not just the head, in order to deepen relationships and to strengthen each other. And so that's what we'll be doing with our listeners and with ourselves, is strengthening our own relationship as friends, and in various ways as I've supported or led you, and in ways that you've led me. Cristina Pearse is the founder and CEO of the Protea Foundation, and we'll come back to that, I think, later in the show. But we're all rich people, and certainly that's true of Cristina. She's a cook, a chef, a sommelier, an artist, an MBA grad, and a serial entrepreneur. She's a mom, she's a spouse, a convener of women leaders, a therapist, and as I said, for me, a friend, but also a guide and a teacher. And in our exchange, Christina's also an author. I got to read, thank you so much for the honor, a first draft of a book coming out this year, The Sovereign Soul, a field guide to blooming on broken ground. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to just share a little bit about that title. I think it's so rich, and it's deep and wide. It's rich with the stuff of memoir, of your own personal story, and it's wide. It covers a lot of ground in neurobiology, for instance, and the mythology of Hawaii, where you're from. It's wide in that sense, and it's deep about learning in human relationship. What Diacardia is all about is going deeper oftentimes. How human relationships are amazing, but they're also dangerous and difficult and painful sometimes. And to be more concrete, we will talk about trauma in this episode. Cristina, in a nutshell, this book, The Sovereign Soul, we think of countries as sovereigns, but The Sovereign Soul, this field guide, in a nutshell, what's your book about? And who's going to want to read it when it comes out?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Dan. We each bring such amazing, unique, vivid experiences into our expression, what it means to be human, what it means to be in an intimate relationship, right, together with others, family. And this book is basically like a cartographer returning with a map from this extraordinary experience of going through complex trauma, right? Trauma of 1,000 cuts, not necessarily one big trauma, but a complex trauma as a lived experience, and how that impacted my ability to heal. It touches on neurobiology because our bodies override our ability to use our executive function, right? We can't lead always with the head. We have to sometimes lead with the heart. Sometimes there's blockages in between those pathways. And so a large component of my book is coming back from the experience of being in the MAPS phase 3 MDMA assisted therapy trial, both with placebo and in the crossover study, which meant I received the medicine, and being able to tell you through a clinical lens exactly what the difference was and why my nervous system was able to work more readily through one pathway versus the other.
Let's pull that apart for our listeners. MAPS is an acronym that you just used.
Yeah, so MDMA is an empathogen. It's a substance that is used. It's known more readily as ecstasy, and people have been using it for decades, right? For self growth, self awareness, parties.
Fun parties,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, right. It creates this sense of incredible connection and empathy in people so often. So this is using those same mechanisms, but in a therapeutic realm.
And in this therapeutic realm. And so you were in a psychological study of the effect of MDMA with therapy assistance on people who had experienced trauma. So you got into this study because you had experienced trauma, right?
Correct. Yeah, you
And
had to
then
have a diagnosis of PTSD in order to
a
be in this.
diagnosis of PTSD got you into this study. And you told us, as I recall, you got funneled, you had no way of knowing, into the control group. So you were given a placebo, a fake medicine that did nothing to your brain, but you also had the therapist accompanying you for a couple days of talking about your trauma. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a 40-hour therapeutic protocol. So it's an
40 hours.
intensive, yeah, 40 hours through the trial. And of course, I went through that twice.
Because then they allowed you to go through the experimental experience. And so this time it was having been administered MDMA. How do you take that? How did you consume the medicine?
Orally as capsules. You're presented with an initial dose and then an increase if your body accepts it through 3 different experiential sessions.
Great. And so then you therapists sat with you in this second time through the experiment while you were on the medicine. I'm going to refer to it as the medicine. That has lots of meanings for us. Most of us grew up thinking that was aspirin or penicillin or something like that, as distinct from drugs, which had all these overtones. Native people have used what they call medicines for centuries, millennia, probably, plant medicines, which we use as alcohol and now legally as cannabis in many places. We could refer to those as medicines. So you had these chemicals in your system, and then you spent time a day or two with 2 therapists, as I recall. Is that right?
Yeah, 2 therapists in the room for 3 8-hour sessions, intensive sessions. And then, of course, you had integration sessions following each one of those intensive sessions. So
Okay.
it's one thing to then go through this amazing experience, and then it's a 90-minute session afterwards to help start to do the work of processing what that experience meant.
Right. Great. So we're going to step back because I want us to talk about MDMA. And so we're going to get some of that perspective and some of the science of it. But I think we should step back as those who've experienced traumas in a generic sense, and those who've experienced traumas in a clinical sense, as we think about people who've been through war or sexual abuse. But we're going to step back and look at us because we're doing Diacardia. It's about how it shows up in relationships. So I want to just pull our lens back for a minute, Cristina, and set the framework that relationships are hard. This is how I've approached Diacardia. That I've had hard ones with my dad, with one of my kids, with my spouse, with some of my business partners, with bosses. Like, it just takes work, and they're not always great. When we talk about these very special partnerships of a life partner or an oldest child or an aging parent or a work partner, these really special dyadic relationships, they seem harder these days in a lot of ways, that the old conventions have broken a little bit and things are harder. And I want to say in this case that they're harder because we're often in threesomes. And I don't mean that in the 1970s, 2000s sexual way of threesomes. I mean, there's me and there's Jennifer, my wife. Or there's me and one of my kids, or me and my dad when I had him in this life, and now I still have him in my head. But there's a third party. It might be labeled depression, deep sadness that pulls. I've diagnosed myself that way, not liking the word, but accepting, boy, I fit a lot of this. There's a partner of anxiety sometimes, that someone is easily agitated, almost living in a condition of anxiety. And so they can fight and they can flee. And now we're really learning of this kind of newly diagnosed and written about third partner of trauma, of what we could call we could lump all of these as, mental illness or mental challenges. You've shared with me a better way to refer to them than mental illness, which I'm still stuck in that old model. How would you, as a therapist, say to somebody who's listening and has depression or trauma or anxiety or other kinds of um, coping mechanisms that are in some ways dysfunctional? How do we refer to ourselves, if that's me, as it is in my relationship, or my wife, not particularly her situation, but some of my close partners? There's four of us in the relationship: me, him, or her, or them, in some cases them, and then their depression or anxiety and mine too. How do we frame it? Like, language matters a lot of times.
It really does. And thank you for naming all of that. I think for the listeners, a definition that really draws me for trauma is that trauma is the alarm that never stops ringing, even after a threat subsides. And so if you think about lived experience, that can look so different for so many people. And so who am I to determine as a diagnostician what is more meaningful, less meaningful, as an experience to someone, right? Everyone comes into the room with their sense of what that relative threat is.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that I advocate for so strongly in my work is that this idea of complex trauma, being people that have experienced multiple forms of sort of existential threat, or natural disasters, bullying, cultural, exclusion. I mean, there's so many different forms of trauma aside from all of the big T traumas, auto accidents and war and, all those kinds of things as well. But that complex trauma in and of itself is a master of disguise. The symptoms are what we as humans report when we show up to the clinic. And so if we're constantly looking at the symptoms and we're trying to match those to a diagnostic, so often we miss the real thing, which is the story behind that. And so that's why I so appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. It's really relevant because just like when you talk about being in partnership with Jennifer, one thing that I realized, I did not get this MDMA assisted trial experience until I was, in my late 40s. So for decades, I carried my trauma into every relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was constantly scanning for threat, right? Waiting for the other shoe to drop. My own history was that people were not safe. People were not necessarily to be trusted. And so when we talk about that trauma being that alarm that's constantly going off, we start to assume that the things, we're big predictive machines, right? We tend to assume that the things that have happened to us before are going to happen again. So I hope that helps to understand. It's not a one-word answer of what trauma is, but trauma is all that experience that we live, that we sort of tangle up behind us. As you were describing, something that came to mind for me and comes up often is this idea of each one of us in relationship almost like dragging along a rug with all of this stuff that we've stuffed underneath it, hoping that the other people won't notice. But there it is nonetheless, right? It's in the room with us and can't be ignored.
Yeah. So let me rewind the tape a little bit, just because you said some things that are very new to me still. Trauma's not new to me. I might talk about that a little bit. But the ideas and the awareness, which give us new choices when we start to understand this is what addiction looks like, or this is what trauma looks like, then we start to have new ways to deal with it. And so it's kind of new to me. So you talked about two forms. One, I think you called it big T or capital T trauma. That's like war. My father, as a medic in Korea, who literally hauled people out of battle, a couple of them alive, one or more dead. That's the big one. That's the one we've seen in movies. And then you talked about another one, complex. Is that what it's referred to as?
Yeah, and so the little t trauma, right? What I describe is the traumas that impact us, you know, in some incremental way. Those are the little t traumas, and when those add up, those become complex trauma. We're layered, right? As humans, we have layers of experiences upon us, and so that's that complex trauma is that we don't point to one singular event. There's
Hmm.
this idea of poly-victimization. You can be traumatized multiple times, and
Yeah,
particularly when you're in situations where you have no escape.
right,
Children growing up in environments where their caregivers are not safe,
right,
or when they are in high risk, war-torn settings or that sort of thing, those lines get very blurry
right.
between the big T and little T traumas. But the idea is that there is a singular event versus, the poly-victimization.
It seems to me they cross over. This is from my own experience, which I'll share just a little bit of. That when I was just over 3 years old, already with three sisters who were 5 years old, 4 years old, 2 years old. My mother had yet another child, but this one was different. He was a boy. And 2 months after he was born, and after I had completely fallen in love with him, he died of Cribb's death, sudden infant death syndrome. It's called SIDS. He was there 1 minute and gone the next. Not hard to imagine how traumatizing that was, and how incapable a 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old was to understand. For adults to think that a 3.5-year-old was having a really powerful experience, certainly back in the day when I was born. So I had that trauma, Christina, which I would say would be big T. But that also allowed a kind of re-triggering. So the sense of abandonment, can you depend on your friends? Can you depend on life itself? Because this little guy just got plucked out. He was here one day and gone the next. Um, and the complexes with which I think my mind dealt with that, for example, to overcompensate, to be so good in school, so smart, so good in church, that I wouldn't be plucked away like he was, or that I would be strong enough. So I think I imagine there's a way that we get, as we would say in the vernacular, and maybe correct me if there's better language for this, re-triggered, that something happens when a girl breaks up with me, that
Mhm.
it's tremendously difficult, for example, or somebody betrays me in some way. So is there a real value in the two categories, maybe big T and small T? There's probably a lot of crossover, right? That we all had the trauma of leaving home, our mama,
Yeah,
before
yeah.
we
No,
had any defense. We left home,
our origin story originates in trauma, right? We come
right?
screeching through the birth canal. It's not a calm moment. Yeah, from the very beginning. No, I think it far less matters, and I think that's my point, as to how
Huh.
we categorize or quantify or label the kinds of trauma. Like I said, we are layered with our experience. And so, as an example, and forgive me, I don't want to misspeak by any means, but as you were retelling, for example, your experience of dealing with that significant loss of your
Hmm.
younger sibling,
Yeah.
right? There's so many layers there. It's where is Dan? How old are you developmentally? What is your understanding of cause and effect in the world? Did you do anything to bring that on?
Oh yeah.
Is
Oh
there
yeah.
this unpredictability about the world in general? Why is something good being taken away? If bad is what is, not rewarded in this world, so it can come down to that moral structure that's already being ingrained in you. Then the layer of what happens to the other people around you and how they are impacted by that loss. The abandonment can happen because they're not available to you anymore,
Right.
right?
Right.
That shifts the energy. So many layers from that one experience by every person in that room. They are all going through that experience in a very different way, depending on where they are and what they've already been through,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Twin studies are fascinating because twins, biologically, for all intent and purpose, identical, growing up in the same household, can have completely different experiences. And that's
Right.
why we go back to the definition of trauma itself, which is trauma is that reaction to, it isn't the experience itself. So if we're trying to quantify or qualify the experience, that's missing the point, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
how we react. It's
Yeah.
our sense of meaning and purpose from that
Yeah.
experience.
That's wonderful. Wonderful reframing that we think of trauma as the thing and we compare things. And you're saying, no, it's very different. It's unique and it's individual. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit. And let's take the big T example of trauma. I want you to talk to us about what happens in the brain. But before you do that, what might have been happening in my 3.5-year-old brain then? But before you do that, I just want you to say a word. I'm nervous. I'm anxious in a good way. Anxiety can be really helpful. The last thing I want in this episode is to provoke somebody in a way that isn't helpful. I would use the word trigger because it's just in the environment. But is there anything you would say to our listeners about like how to listen or even, I suppose, whether to listen as you begin to talk in my next question about what's happening in the brain? So I just want to be sensitive to listeners, which is part of Diacardia. And it's hard because our listeners aren't here to say, I hate this, don't say that. But what might they say? What might we be aware of?
Yeah, our nervous systems are so amazing in that if we pause long enough to listen to the kind of feedback we're getting from our bodies, right? It's just standing right now, observing how you're breathing. If anything that we're talking about starts to make you feel like your heart is racing, or you have this impulse to shut it off, or you're having some visceral reaction to it, all of those things are absolutely valid. And it's just an invitation to maybe have a little self-compassion. It can be incredibly activating, right? I like to use that term, activating,
Activating.
when you're being exposed to material that either might have an anchor in your own life or has some meaning, or some reaction that's coming up. That can all happen.
Yeah.
So in extreme cases, certainly reach out for support. There's so many national hotlines and resources there to help
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah. I want to stop there to say first, thank you. When you first began to answer that question, before you even said breathing, I noticed myself breathing differently and calming my system. The second thing I want to say is that the beautiful thing about podcasts, unlike real relationships like you and I are in right now, is you can pause it. I mean, we could actually pause this since we're recording it, but it's hard in relationship when you're activated, when your traumatized self is reactivated, when the alarm, as you said, doesn't stop ringing and now it's ringing louder. I love that description. So people, pause this conversation if it's helpful for you, but it feels triggering to you. It feels activating as a listener in an unhealthy way. If you're cool, just keep breathing and maybe just be more attentive to the out breath, which is the rest and relax system that you came factory equipped with. You have a system to go and let go and release something. So that's wonderful. So talk about what does happen, Cristina, in the instance of trauma. What happens in the brain? Because we're learning so much about neurology now.
Yeah, and not to belabor the neuroscience, but to rather simplify it in a way
Yeah.
that makes it, I think, bite-sized, is
Mm.
I like to use a metaphor of when you go through, multiple traumatic experiences or a big traumatic experience, your nervous system in that state of overwhelm tends to have a reaction that is, one of four primary responses, but it's sort of what's known as that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. There's lots of F's that are used in
Right.
various communities.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
it's that sort of rigid response as a result of overwhelm. And so when we talk about being activated or being triggered, right, it's that immediate, what I refer to as a PTSD superhighway. You're on a concrete highway, full throttle ahead, no control of this vehicle that you are supposed to be in charge of, right? Because you are already to the other far extreme of, fight or freeze or, that response, without having that genuine ability to step away from yourself and let that emotion have some space. The response just is visceral and immediate.
I'm wondering about, like, if there is a single triggering incident. I'm thinking about my own story, which I don't have the full memory of. More and more memory is released to me. But I assume I would have wanted to run. Um, that would have been the overwhelming impulse. But are you saying that what happens in that first instance, or say a strong return instance of it, maybe you're unconscious of how you had trauma early in your life, but you have panic, for instance, you have super high anxiety sometimes, or great fear. Are we saying that what happens the first time, so to speak, is then what we keep doing, or is that not necessarily a pattern? Do we move between fight, flight, and freeze, or does one of them become our habitual go-to strategy,
It's
even
such a
when it's not necessary? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's such a great question. And, to be fair, the answer is it depends, right?
Mm. Yeah.
For some individuals, they may have a preferred, not preferred, but, a well-worn response, and it might be to freeze, right? What I have really come to understand in myself through my own lived experience is that it's a little like, once you have sort of this load of trauma in your life, it's a little like then having a drafty house. So many things can be activating and triggering. And so if any of those windows are left open, right, it doesn't really matter what window it came in. The house is drafty. Like, it impacts the whole body, right? It impacts everything at that point. So in the case of, for example, you have the example of, feeling, I think you mentioned like the fear of abandonment through your own experience, right? That
Right.
early experience. Anything then that hints at abandonment in a moment going forward in your life can absolutely activate that feeling from all the way back in that moment, years ago, right? And anything that brings up that emotion in you can instantly bring you back. It's like time travel.
Mm.
It is remarkable how our polyvagal, our nervous systems are, they're so amazing at that response, and yet they don't have a watch. It doesn't tell time.
It
So yeah,
doesn't tell time in the sense that it's as if I'm back at that 3.5-year-old experience, and I'm worried I've lost my brother, and I'm worried my mom's not going to be there for me, or my dad can't protect me. And so in similar situations, it doesn't have a clock. You're saying it's taking me right back, as though I'm stuck there, really, in a way, right?
yeah, it's an abscess. It's a wound that's not healed fully,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? That
Uh-huh.
becomes that part of that trauma, is that we haven't fully processed an
Mhm.
experience.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so we're still very much vulnerable and very open in that wound. And so anything that hints at that feeling, at that memory, right,
Right.
can be
Right.
really activating for people.
Christina, I want to jump to diacardia, right? And go back to this metaphor that came to me when I was thinking about it. There was actually a book by a Jungian psychologist called Invisible Partners, I think was the name, by Sanford. And it was really about, in his interesting view of the world 50 years ago, it was about how a man typically has a male presence but has an inner feminine, and a woman has a female presence but has an inner masculine. Our culture has changed so much. We're much more fluid than that. My wife is what somebody would have called very masculine because she's strong and dominant, tremendous leader. And I, as I come to know myself, find myself to be much more feminine, much more appreciative, much more welcoming, much more relational. But I'm saying it only to say invisible partners. Like Jennifer has always had an invisible partner I've had with me, which is the experience of trauma. So you described it, interestingly, you heard it as there's like bumps under the rug, like things are smooth and then you trip over something. So she trips over that hidden part of me exactly the way you described it, as though I'm 3.5 and some small thing has activated that fearful side. Like, can I trust? Does she really love me? Is she really here with me? So I guess what seems obvious to me is that we don't see that. She doesn't see that. She's come to see it over many, many years. She's come to see that's a hurt Dan. That's a wounded Dan. It sounds trite to some people, but that's a wounded boy. That's a little boy who's wounded again. And I don't know, Christina, it's such a hard move for people like Jennifer, who does it amazingly well, remarkably well, to say, it's not me that he's running from or being sarcastic with, which would be a form of kind of fight and flight. Like, I got you, like passive aggressive, like it looks like I don't really care, but actually I'm zinging you. To see, like, it's not about her. Like, it's not about you. But of course, everything's always about us as people. But it just seems like if you knew that your partner might be your boss, might be your oldest child, might be your mother as she ages, has that woundedness, and you're just activating it. You're not a bad person. Your intentions are not at all bad. You didn't mean to hurt them at all. You didn't mean to threaten them at all. But there's that other person living within them, right? That little wounded person. I don't know. What do you make of this? I'm doing therapy online with you, Christina.
No, it's so interesting, right? We have this multiplicity in ourselves. And yeah, think about those various, like you're describing, right? Those parts of us that show up in that relationship especially. So you already have the facets that are you and all of your experiences, right? And
Right.
your prediction on how anything is going to happen at any given time. And then your partner is doing the same thing. And the opportunity, which, like you said, I think you're alluding to this, that seems kind of obvious, is in a coupledom, right? In that coupling,
Right.
is having that presence of mind well enough to have that awareness of, oh, am I talking to fully regulated, fully healthy and vibrant Dan right now? Or am I talking to wounded, hurt, fearful? Abandonment might be an issue, right? Something else has happened today that's bringing that up, whatever. Like, what is that for them? And I also want to say that I love that it was beautiful in your own telling just a moment ago, how you're like, of course, everyone's trying to be well and do well, and they have no ill intent. But sometimes people do have bad intent, right? Sometimes they are hurtful and they want to be because they themselves are hurt or wounded.
Right.
And that's when we're in that coupling where we aren't at our best selves, right? Two people are dysregulated in that moment. So I really like the piece around when you're in a committed coupling, right? When you're in that diacardic, the way that you so beautifully describe it, it's raising that awareness of, where are you? Where am I? Right? Am I fully able to be co-regulating with you right now in this moment? Or do we have a little tending to do for one another? The most important thing is, if you're hurt or harmed, it's absolutely my job as your partner to bring you to a comfortable, warm, safe place, right? That's what it means to be.
Right. That's the hope, right? I mean, that's the
the hope.
hope and you turn it into maybe an intent, is that you
Absolutely.
will help to calm me. You will help to see, okay, I need to be, you're using the word regulated, as opposed to that multiplicity, and as opposed to that scared child or that angry adolescent, in me who's been punished unfairly by parents. And you're reminding me of that. Yeah, you're saying it's your job. It's the person you're coupled with. What a hard job. What a
Yeah,
hard
absolutely.
job to be. And you add the really important dynamic I didn't, which is that, yeah, you have your own wounds. And so sometimes they crisscross so almost viciously. And so how, this is not a give me the simple answer, but how do I recognize, okay, I'm activated. The alarm hasn't stopped ringing, but this is not the situation I was in when I was 3, or when I was fired, or when I was sexually abused. This is a partner who's trying, but is really okay. So I need to calm myself down, right? And but if you're a good partner, you might say to me, "Wow, you really seem activated." I don't know. What are some lines you could say when a partner, when you know a partner's been wounded, and they know they've been wounded, and they know those wounds still come up, the alarm bells go off. What do you say when your partner, when you start to sense your partner Steve, my partner Jennifer, is activated? What do we say to them?
Oh, man, I mean, having been personally in that moment so many times, more than I care to share,
Yeah.
right? I'm
Truth,
already in this wounded state,
truth be told, we all have been.
and
Truth,
I'm
people, we
lashing out and I'm angry and I know that I'm not
right,
seeing things clearly, right? So to answer, I think in the not to oversimplify, but generally to me, two rules, right?
yeah,
Number one, time. It's time for a timeout, right? It's
mm,
amazing how different the world looks 30 minutes from now
right,
when each of you are able to co-regulate, right? You give each other that time. And I know for me, one of the things that was just that foundational safety that happens in a coupling is to have that partner say, look, even in the heat of things, we are going to work this out together. But right now is not the time, right? Recognizing that we're in that heat. And right now I don't know what it is, but let me go away and figure it out. Let me figure out which side I need to clean up first, like my side of the street, right?
uh-huh,
Let you have a pause to work on yours again. And then, but the commitment is there. We're not triggering abandonment issues. We're not triggering attachment issues, right? We're committed. We're going to come back to this, but let's give ourselves a little moment. And there's a neurobiological reason for this, which is when we are neurochemically fired up in threat, it takes our body a minute to calm down. And we have to take a little time out and breathe. And so I think, that individual timing can truly be very different for different people. I know for me, sometimes I might need 30 minutes to let my body calm down before I'm
yeah,
actually able to go back and have a conversation about something that feels very activating.
yeah. I had a very challenging relationship. I don't want to say with whom, because I want to protect confidentiality, but we were very close enough that we could hurt each other in a way. Um, and we would get activated, both activated. And after a while, and we were both committed to the relationship. We cared about each other, we cared about ourselves, and we cared about the relationship, all three. We just did. We were lucky because I cared about them, they cared about me, and we cared about
Mm,
the relationship. We had to put the relationship actually on pause for a while. But what I want to echo in what you're saying, your first point you said was time. Give yourself and the other person time. And we did arrive at that. Like either of us can call a timeout at any point. Then the argument ends. Like we agree on that. One of us may still be activated that when the other says, I'm taking a timeout, I need a timeout, I need to calm my system. The other person might say, you're running away.
yeah.
But after we had separated, we both knew shouldn't have said that. We agreed, like we can calm. So I just want to say that. And I also want to add that in your answer that there's a biological or neurological grounding in this. 100%. Like, I think that is so true. And it gives you permission to say, okay, I need to slow down. It's my body. My body needs this, and my body will work with it. My body will calm down when it feels like the threat is gone, when it feels like I am the impala or the deer and the lion has left. I can calm, and that happens, right? So I just want to echo that, like, as a strategy, when one or both of you have in your pocket this hidden partner of woundedness and an alarm that can go off at almost any point and never stop ringing. Time is a really, time is your friend, because as you said, it doesn't have a watch. It doesn't remember. And when we walk away, we can remember, I'm not 3 years old. I'm not the adolescent kid who had an alcoholic father. I have a partner who's trying with me. They're trying. Sometimes I find them very trying, but they're trying to make things better. Okay, so that's point one for all of us who have this in our pocket, is time. You had a second thing, and that wasn't a scripture. That was a great answer.
No, thank you. That second point being that it was magic for me with my own kinds of traumatic experiences, right? Talk about abandonment issues. To just have that partner lean in, excuse me, and say, hey, we are going to work this out. Just magic words,
Mm,
right? So understanding what those activations are for your partner allows you to still create that safety in that moment where neither one of you are showing up as your best selves, and still be able to honor that, right? That can do so much to keep that other person in that, in that more inclined present space. It's an interesting thing because when you talk about, okay, hey, there's a timeout, right? You have to plan for that though. As a couple, you have to agree, like, we're going to plan that when we are noticing that one or both of us are in that heat moment, either I observe it of you or you observe it of me, or I observe it of myself, or, whatever dynamic is going on, that we're going to
yeah.
agree on a particular
Yes.
timeout, right? We plan for that.
Yes.
That allows us to kind of create that safety again. Here's what a hellion I was in my full unthrottled trauma response. I would be chasing poor Steve around, going, no, do not run away from me. We're going to solve this right
Mm,
now, right?
mm,
Because I'm triggered in my abandonment.
mm,
And so for me, it's like it was death, right? It felt like death for him to be walking away saying, I can't talk to you right now. You're too volatile.
sure.
And so just that ability to recognize that everything that I thought I was doing to survive was the exact opposite of what
Mm,
I needed to be doing at that moment.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Can you say something about that, something more about that last sentence, that what I needed to survive was the exact opposite of what I was doing?
Yeah.
You're saying chasing him was the opposite and saying we need it now. You needed to calm. Is that right? Am I hearing
Yeah,
that right?
I'm saying that my abandonment, childhood issues, right, of abandonment and uncertainty and not having that, that predictable, reliable partner is coming up. And at that moment, of course, my panic response is to cling on as hard as I possibly can, when what my body really needs in that moment is to calm down, right? I am not going to say or do anything rational or healthy or beneficial when I am in that reactive fight or flight state. And so it can seem really counterintuitive, particularly for someone who is activated, that, hey, maybe what everything tells me is right. It's like I've made the metaphor of being a pilot and flying upside down. The horizon is exactly the opposite, right?
Mm,
Everything you think you are doing, if you are pointing in one direction versus the other, is the exact opposite of what you need in that moment. And that's where I go back to that feeling like complex trauma can bring a partner into a relationship where what they do in those heightened conflicts are
mm,
exactly the opposite of what they need to be doing to take care of themselves.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I want to make one point that I may edit out of this,
yeah,
which
absolutely.
is that I'm just thinking about time, and that when we're in a present time, it reminds us of a past time. that we've stored and that's been painful and that we think is repeating. But we can come into the present time, and we may have to separate from the person for a minute in the present time and come back to ourselves, come back to breathing, come back to regulating ourselves, just to the simple breath, in and out, to release something. But the second point, so that's past and present. And what you were saying is that when you can say to your partner, we're going to work this out, we're going to work this out, there's a future. We're going to work this out. You're not being abandoned. We're going to come back. Like, okay, that's the whole thing, right? Like if I can show up for Jennifer, who seldom gets hyper activated and angry at me because she's just an amazing human being and has such self-discipline and generosity and et cetera, et cetera. But if she were to be activated and say, hey, babe, we're like, no worries, like we're in this, and I need to take a minute. You might not, but because she probably wouldn't think she did. I need to take a minute and just calm myself because I'm not showing up the way I want to show up. But I'm coming back. Like I'm committed to this. I can see how that promise of a future can heal a past in a way, or hold the past at bay, so that we can be present for now. It's wonderful, wonderful advice. Cristina Pearse, this has been like so awesome, and we could go on. And so I'm going to beg you to do another session. And I want to just preview that we've left out a really, really important thing. We started by talking about a drug trial you were in and how MDMA can be really powerful. And next time we'll talk about how therapy is really good. Talking is really good. Exercise is really good. If you happen to have a God who forgives you and loves you, that's really good. Conversation is really good. And there's also a biology. And we're learning a lot that you share with us next time about that physiology, that biology, that biochemistry, that some medicines can really, really help us and have had extraordinary impacts. And so I look forward to sharing that with you. I wonder what you would want to say, like in wrapping this up, are talking about the third and sometimes fourth partners that are with us in relationship, of my trauma and her or his or their trauma as well. What stands out for you now?
I think what stands out for me is really instilling a sense of hope. We are learning so much more of how our lived experiences shape the way we show up at any given time and place. And more than ever, we are truly understanding how our neurobiology, that thing that makes us very human and connected to one another, is far more similar than it is dissimilar. And just having that awareness of how those things can impact us can go, a significant way toward having more compassion toward other people, whether it's in your partner, with your loved one, or in your family, or that person that is, doing some irrational to you behavior in public somewhere. So yeah, it's just, we are learning so much. There are so many amazing scholars, therapists, researchers working in these spaces, on this race to understand our inner psyche and how our neurobiology affects how we show up. And so, stay tuned. It's a beautiful journey.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in to the Wise Cristina. Awareness of how these things work gives us new choices. Today, really the awareness that your body gets activated, and the choice to say to your partner, hey, we're going to work this out, and to say to yourself, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to go back and breathe when I've been activated. That's tremendous awareness and two solid choices. So thanks again, Cristina.
Always wonderful.
Yeah. Subscribe, like, and share if you appreciate Diacardia, the podcast to strengthen your partnership by speaking and listening through the heart. I'm Dan Mulhern, and I thank you for listening.